They say paradise has a price, but nobody tells you that sometimes the cost is everything you have. I learned that lesson the hard way in a city that never sleeps, where neon lights hide the shadows and smiles come with price tags. This is my story about coming to Pattaya with dreams in my pocket and learning that not all gold glitters the same under the Thai sun. If you're watching this and you've ever thought about starting over in a foreign land, stick around, because what I'm about to share might just save you from making the same mistakes I did. And hey, if you find value in this story, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. I'd love to know if my experience resonates with anyone else out there. I landed in Pattaya 9 years ago with what I thought was a bulletproof plan. Back in Manchester, I'd sold my flat, a modest 2-bedroom place that had been my home for 15 years. The sale gave me a decent chunk of money, nothing extravagant but enough to feel secure. I also had my pension kicking in each month, a steady stream that seemed like more than enough for the lifestyle I'd read about online. Thailand was supposed to be cheap, right? Everyone said so. The forums, the YouTube videos, the blogs written by guys living their best lives on beaches with cold beers in hand. That was going to be me. I was 47 years old, recently divorced, no kids and tired of the grey skies and the 9-to-5 grind that had defined my entire adult life. Pattaya felt like freedom. It felt like a second chance. The first few weeks were exactly what I'd imagined. I stayed in a small hotel near Beach Road, nothing fancy but clean and close to everything. The weather was incredible after years of English rain and cold. I'd wake up to sunshine, grab breakfast at a street stall for maybe 60 baht and spend my days exploring. I met other foreigners everywhere, guys from Australia, Germany, America, all with similar stories about escaping something back home. We'd meet at the same bars, share tips about visa runs and which landlords to avoid. It felt like a community. It felt like I belonged somewhere for the first time in years. But here's the thing about Pattaya that nobody really explains until you're already living it. The city runs on a rhythm that pulls you in before you even realize it's happening. At first I told myself I was just enjoying my new life, treating myself after all those years of working hard and saving. A few drinks after dinner became every night. Eating street food occasionally turned into eating out for every single meal, because cooking felt like too much effort when restaurants were so cheap and everywhere. I started going to massage parlors 3 times a week, then daily. Not because I needed it, but because why not? It was affordable and it felt good. I met a woman named Ploy at a bar called the Silver Moon. She was 28, beautiful in that effortless way that Thai women often are, with long dark hair and a smile that made you feel like you were the only person in the room. She worked there serving drinks and keeping customers happy, and I knew what that meant. I wasn't naive, but when she laughed at my jokes and listened to my stories about England, something shifted. She made me feel young again. She made me feel wanted. Within 2 months, I was paying her bar fine almost every night, just so we could spend time together without the noise and distraction of other customers. I convinced myself it was different with us. She'd tell me about her family up country, her mother who was sick, her younger brother who needed money for school. I wanted to help. I wanted to be the man who made her life easier. The money started disappearing faster than I'd planned. My first apartment was costing me 12,000 baht a month, which seemed reasonable, but then there were deposits, utility bills that were higher than expected, internet costs, and the constant small expenses that add up when you're living somewhere new. I bought a motorbike because everyone said it was essential for getting around Pattaya. That was another 40,000 baht gone in one transaction. Then there were visa fees, border runs, and the agents who charged extra to make the process easier. I wasn't keeping track properly. I'd check my bank account and see the numbers dropping, but I'd tell myself it was fine, that I was just settling in and things would level out once I got into a routine. Ploy moved in with me after 4 months. She quit her job at the Silver Moon and I was proud of that. I felt like I'd saved her from that life. She cooked for me sometimes, kept the apartment tidy, and we'd ride the motorbike down to Jomtin Beach on quiet afternoons. It felt domestic and real, but she still needed money for her family. Her mother's medical bills were constant. Her brother's school fees came up every few months. There was always something, and I always paid because I loved her. At least I thought I did. Looking back now, I'm not sure what I loved more, her or the way she made me feel about myself. I started making friends with other expats who seemed to have their lives together. There was David from Birmingham, a guy in his early 50s who'd been in Pattaya for 7 years. He owned a small bar near Soy Buaco and always seemed to have cash to throw around. He'd buy rounds for everyone, take groups of us out for seafood dinners by the beach and talk about how well his business was doing. Then there was Henrik from Sweden, quiet and thoughtful, who'd been teaching English online and claimed he was living comfortably on about 50,000 baht a month. We'd meet up regularly at a cafe called the Corner House, drink coffee, and swap stories about life as foreigners in Thailand. They became my circle, the people I relied on when things felt overwhelming or confusing. David was the one who first mentioned investment opportunities to me. We were sitting at his bar one evening, just the two of us after the crowd had thinned out. He told me he was looking at opening another place, something bigger and better located, maybe near Walking Street where the real money was. He said he needed investors, and that if I put in 300,000 baht, he could guarantee me a 20% return within a year. He had spreadsheets, projected earnings, plans for themed nights and promotions. It all sounded legitimate. I trusted him because he was my friend, and because I was getting bored. The initial excitement of living in Pattaya was fading. My days had become repetitive. Wake up late, eat. Go to the gym maybe. Hang out at bars, go home with ploy. I had no purpose, and investing in something felt like a way to be productive, to have a stake in something beyond just existing. I gave David the money. 300,000 baht transferred from my savings account to his. He promised paperwork would follow, contracts and official documents proving my partnership in the new bar. Those documents never came. At first he had excuses. The lawyers were slow. Permits were taking longer than expected. Government bureaucracy was a nightmare. I believed him because I wanted to. 2 months passed, and I started asking more directly about updates. He'd gotten vague, changing the subject or saying things were still in progress. Then one day I went to his bar and it was closed, not just for the day but permanently. The shutters were down, and there was a sign in Thai that I couldn't read. I asked around and eventually found out from another bar owner that David had skipped town owing money to multiple people. He'd apparently run the same investment scam on at least 4 other foreigners before me. I never saw him again and my 300,000 baht was gone. That was the first real hit to my finances, the moment I realized I wasn't as smart or careful as I thought I was. Ploy tried to comfort me, but I could see something in her eyes, a flicker of concern maybe, or calculation. I think she realized then that I wasn't the endless money supply she'd assumed I was. Things got tighter after that. I cut back on going out as much, tried to cook more at home, stopped the daily massages. But Ploy's needs didn't decrease. In fact, they seemed to increase. Her mother needed surgery now, something serious that would cost over 100,000 baht. I didn't have that kind of cash readily available anymore, but I found myself taking money from my pension fund early, paying penalties and fees just to get access to it. I sent the money to Ploy's family account and trusted it was going where she said it was. A week later, I saw photos on her Facebook of her brother with a brand new iPhone and expensive sneakers. When I asked her about it, she got defensive, said her brother deserved nice things after working so hard, that I was being selfish and didn't understand Thai family culture. Maybe she was right. Maybe I was the one who didn't get it. But doubt was creeping in, and with it came resentment. I started drinking more heavily. Not just socially at bars, but alone in the apartment. Cheap bottles of Hong Thong whiskey that I'd buy from 7-Eleven and drink until I couldn't think clearly anymore. Henrik noticed and pulled me aside one afternoon. He told me I needed to slow down, that he'd seen too many expats destroy themselves this way. He offered to help me budget, to look at my finances properly and figure out a sustainable plan. I was too proud to accept at first, but eventually I agreed because I was scared. We sat down with all my bank statements and receipts, and the reality was worse than I'd thought. I was spending nearly 70,000 baht a month, sometimes more. My pension was only 55,000. I'd been eating into my savings without fully realizing the extent of it. At the rate I was going, I had maybe 18 months before I'd be completely broke. Henrik suggested I move to a cheaper apartment, maybe out in Nong Pru or somewhere further from the tourist areas where rent was half the price. He also said I needed to have a serious conversation with Ploy about money and boundaries. That conversation didn't go well. I tried to explain that I couldn't keep supporting her family the way I had been, that I needed to be more careful with my spending. She cried and said I didn't love her, that I was just like every other foreigner who saw Thai women as temporary and disposable. She packed a bag and left that night, said she was going back to her family. I thought she'd come back after a few days, but she didn't. A week later, I saw her at the Silver Moon again, working, laughing with other customers, the same way she'd laughed with me when we first met. It hurt more than I expected. Not just losing her, but realizing that maybe none of it had been real. Maybe I'd paid for a fantasy and convinced myself it was love. I was alone again, but this time with significantly less money and a lot more bitterness. I moved to a smaller apartment in Nong Pru, like Henrik suggested. The rent was 7,000 baht a month, basic but functional. I started cooking all my meals at home, shopping at local markets instead of tourist traps. I cut out alcohol entirely for a few months because I knew it was both expensive and destructive. I stopped going to bars and started spending more time at the gym or walking along quieter beaches where tourists didn't gather. It was lonely but necessary. I needed to reset, to figure out who I was in this place without the distractions and the spending and the relationships that were costing me more than just money. During this time, I met an Australian named Greg, who lived in the same apartment complex. He was 62, retired, and had been in Thailand for 12 years. He told me his secret to surviving long-term was having hobbies and routines that didn't cost money. He volunteered at a local animal shelter, taught free English classes to Thai kids twice a week, and spent his evenings reading or watching movies on his laptop. He seemed content in a way that none of the other expats I'd met were. He wasn't chasing anything or trying to recapture youth or prove something to himself. He'd just made peace with a simple life. Greg also warned me about something I hadn't considered, the importance of having an exit plan. He said too many foreigners burn all their bridges back home, sell everything, cut ties with family, and then find themselves trapped in Thailand with no way out if things go wrong. He'd kept his house in Brisbane, rented it out to cover costs, and maintained relationships with his kids and old friends. He said Thailand was wonderful, but it wasn't for everyone and circumstances could change quickly. Health problems, visa crackdowns, political instability, personal crises, any of it could force someone to leave suddenly, without a safety net that became impossible. His words stuck with me because I'd done exactly what he was warning against. I'd sold everything, told my ex-wife and old colleagues I was done with England forever, acted like returning was failure. But what if I needed to go back? What if my health declined or my money ran out completely? I had nowhere to land and no one to call for help. I decided to be smarter about my remaining time and money in Thailand. I sat down and created a proper budget, something I should have done 9 years earlier when I first arrived. I calculated exactly what I needed for rent, food, utilities, visa costs, and a small emergency fund. It came to about 38,000 baht a month if I was careful. That left 17,000 from my pension for anything extra, savings, small luxuries, travel. It wasn't much, but it was sustainable. I also started thinking about ways to generate small amounts of additional income. I couldn't legally work in Thailand without a work permit, but I could do things online. I started doing freelance writing. Nothing glamorous, just basic content work for websites that needed English articles. It brought in an extra 10 to 15,000 baht a month and gave me something productive to focus on. For the first time since arriving in Pattaya, I felt like I had some control over my life again. But Pattaya has a way of testing you just when you think you've figured things out. I got sick about 6 months after Ploy left. It started as a cough that wouldn't go away, then chest pain and difficulty breathing. I ignored it for weeks because I was scared of hospital bills. I didn't have health insurance, something I'd always meant to get but kept putting off because it seemed expensive and unnecessary. By the time I finally went to Bangkok Hospital Pattaya, I had pneumonia and needed to be admitted for 4 days. The bill was 217,000 baht. I nearly had a heart attack when they handed me the invoice. I didn't have that money. I'd rebuilt my savings to about 90,000 baht, and that was supposed to be my emergency cushion. I ended up calling my brother in England, something I swore I'd never do. We hadn't spoken in over 2 years, not since I told him I was leaving and he'd called me irresponsible and childish. Asking him for help was humiliating, but I had no choice. He wired me 150,000 baht and told me I needed to get my act together. that Thailand was clearly not working out the way I'd planned. He wasn't wrong, but hearing it from him still stung. I paid the hospital bill and spent the next few months working extra hours online to pay my brother back. The experience shook me badly. I realized how vulnerable I was, how close I'd come to complete disaster. If the illness had been more serious or required surgery or long-term care, I would have been destroyed financially. That's when I finally got health insurance, a basic policy that cost about 15,000 baht per year. It wasn't comprehensive, but it covered major emergencies and hospitalization. It should have been the first thing I arranged when I moved to Thailand, but like so many expats, I'd convinced myself nothing bad would happen. Around this time, I started noticing other foreigners around Pattaya who were clearly struggling. There was an older German man who sat outside 7-Eleven on Soi Buakau every day, asking for spare change. I learned from others that he'd come to Thailand 20 years ago with decent money, spent it all on women and bars, and now survived on handouts from other expats and tourists. There was a British guy named Colin, who I'd see at the same cheap buffet restaurant every day eating the 80 baht meal, because it was all he could afford. He told me once over a shared table that he'd invested his entire pension lump sum into a bar business with his Thai girlfriend and her brother. They'd pushed him out 6 months later, kept the business and left him with nothing. He was living in a room that cost 2,000 baht a month and trying to survive on a small monthly pension that barely covered food. These weren't anomalies or rare cases. Pattaya was full of men who'd come seeking paradise and ended up broken and trapped. I was terrified of becoming one of them. I also became more aware of the small scams and traps that existed everywhere in Pattaya. Other expats would approach me at bars or cafes with sob stories, lost wallets, delayed pensions, needing a small loan until next week. I fell for it twice before I learned to just say no automatically. There was always a new scheme or opportunity being pitched: investment in property developments, partnerships in restaurants, chances to buy into existing businesses that were supposedly about to explode in popularity. They all sounded good on the surface, but dig deeper, and you'd find they were either complete scams or businesses that had failed multiple times already. The foreigners left standing in Pattaya long-term weren't the trusting ones or the generous ones. They were the skeptical ones who'd learned to protect their money fiercely and assume everyone had an angle. I hated becoming that person, but survival required it. I'd been in Pattaya for 7 years when I met a woman named Ayom through a mutual friend at a birthday party. She wasn't a bar girl. She worked as an accountant for a hotel chain and spoke excellent English. We started dating casually, just coffee and dinners, nothing rushed or transactional. It felt different from what I'd had with Ploy. Ayom paid for her own meals half the time, never asked me for money, and seemed genuinely interested in getting to know me as a person rather than a wallet. We dated for almost a year before she even met any of my friends. It was refreshing, but I was also more guarded than I'd been the first time around. I didn't tell her how much money I had or didn't have. I didn't offer to solve her problems or play the hero. We built something that felt more balanced and real. She eventually told me that many Thai women specifically avoided dating foreigners in Pattaya because the relationships were usually unbalanced and temporary. She said she appreciated that I treated her as an equal, rather than someone to rescue or control. Through Ayom, I started seeing a different side of Pattaya and Thailand generally. She introduced me to her friends who were working professionals, teachers, business owners, people who had nothing to do with the bar scene or tourist industry. We'd attend Thai festivals and family gatherings where I was often the only foreigner. It gave me perspective. The Thailand that most expats experienced in Pattaya was such a narrow slice of what the country actually was. We were living in a bubble, a manufactured reality designed to extract money from lonely foreign men. The real Thailand, the one where actual Thai people lived normal lives with normal concerns, existed parallel to that bubble, but most expats never saw it. Ayom helped me understand the culture better, the importance of family, the concept of face, why certain behaviors that seemed strange to me made perfect sense within Thai social frameworks. I became less judgmental and more curious. My Thai language improved because I was motivated to communicate with her family and friends rather than just ordering food or negotiating with bar girls, but even with a healthier relationship and better understanding of where I was living. The financial pressure never fully went away. Thailand was changing, and Pattaya specifically was getting more expensive. The rent in Nong Pru that had been 7,000 baht went up to 9,000 after 2 years. Food prices increased noticeably. Even street food that used to be 40 baht was now 60 or 70. The exchange rate fluctuated, and there were periods where my pound sterling pension was worth significantly less in baht than it had been when I first arrived. I watched my purchasing power slowly erode year after year. New condos were going up everywhere, marketed at foreign buyers, with promises of rental income and investment returns. I was tempted a few times to buy something, to have an asset rather than just paying rent forever. But I remembered what Greg had told me, and what I'd seen happen to others. Foreigners couldn't own land in Thailand, and even condo ownership came with restrictions and risks. If something went wrong or I needed to leave quickly, selling wouldn't be easy or fast. I'd be locked into a market that was already oversaturated with units that weren't selling. I decided renting was safer, even if it felt like throwing money away each month. The biggest shift in my perspective came during my 8th year in Pattaya. I was 45 now, older than when I'd arrived and acutely aware of time passing. I'd spent nearly a decade in Thailand, and what did I have to show for it? My savings were modest. I had no property, no investments that had worked out, no career trajectory. I'd basically been on an extended vacation that had cost me the most productive earning years of my adult life. If I'd stayed in England and kept working, I'd probably own a house by now, have a substantial pension fund, maybe even remarried and built a more conventional life. Instead, I was living month to month in a foreign country, where I'd always be an outsider, regardless of how long I stayed. The realization didn't make me want to leave immediately, but it did make me reconsider what success looked like. Was it enough to just be comfortable and content, even if I wasn't building toward anything? Was surviving the same as thriving? Heom and I talked about the future sometimes late at night when we couldn't sleep. She'd never been outside of Thailand and was curious about England. I'd paint pictures of green countryside and old pubs and seasons changing, things she'd only seen in movies. She'd ask if I ever wanted to go back, and I honestly didn't know how to answer. Part of me missed England, the familiarity, the sense of belonging, understanding cultural references without explanation. But another part of me had grown so accustomed to Thailand that the thought of returning to cold weather and expensive everything and the pace of Western life felt exhausting. I was stuck between two worlds, not fully belonging to either. Heom said that was common for expats, that they often became people without a real home, forever caught between where they came from and where they ended up. It was a melancholy thought, but accurate. I started volunteering, more like Greg had suggested years earlier. I helped at an English language school twice a week, teaching conversation classes to teenagers. It didn't pay anything, but it gave me purpose and routine beyond just existing. The students were polite and earnest, genuinely trying to improve their English for better job prospects. It reminded me that Thailand wasn't just a playground for bored foreigners, but a real country where real people were working hard to build better lives. Teaching also kept my mind sharp and gave me something to look forward to each week. The school director, a Thai woman named Kun Neet, told me they always needed volunteers because qualified teachers were expensive, and the school served low-income families who couldn't afford private tutors. Knowing I was helping in some small way made the struggle of being in Thailand feel less selfish. Money remained the underlying anxiety, though. Every few months I'd recalculate my budget, look at my savings, project how long I could realistically stay in Thailand if things went wrong. I was always one major emergency away from disaster, and that knowledge sat heavy in my chest even during good times. I'd see other expats who seemed carefree and unburdened, and wonder if they were genuinely more secure than me, or just better at pretending. Some probably had family money or pensions larger than mine. Others were likely in denial about their situation, living day to day without thinking about tomorrow, until tomorrow arrived with problems they couldn't solve. I didn't want to be the guy begging outside 7-Eleven or eating 80 baht buffets because it was all I could afford. I didn't want to die alone in a cheap room with nobody back home, even knowing I was gone. That fear motivated me to stay disciplined, even when discipline was boring. Henrik left Pattaya in my 9th year there. He'd met someone online, a Swedish woman living in Stockholm, and decided to move back to pursue that relationship. Before he left, we met for coffee one last time at the corner house, the same cafe where we'd spent countless afternoons over the years. He told me he'd loved Thailand, but ultimately he needed to be around family and old friends as he got older. He said the isolation of expat life had worn him down more than he'd admitted while living it. I understood completely. After he left, I felt even more alone. Greg was still around, but he was much older, and we didn't have as much in common. David had been a fraud and was long gone. Most of the expats I'd met over the years had either left Thailand or disappeared into their own struggles. The transient nature of expat communities in places like Pattaya meant friendships were often shallow and temporary. People would bond intensely for a few months, then vanish without warning. It was exhausting, constantly rebuilding social circles. Aom and I got more serious. She started staying at my apartment most nights, and we talked about moving in together officially. But there were complications. Her family was traditional and wanted to know my intentions, whether I was serious about her or just passing time. In Thai culture, there were expectations around marriage and sinsod, the traditional gift given to the bride's family. Haeom said her family wouldn't demand much because they weren't wealthy, and she was older at 34, considered late for marriage in Thai society. But they'd still expect something symbolic to show respect. The thought of marriage terrified me, not because I didn't care about Aom, but because of the financial implications and the permanent commitment. I'd failed at marriage once already. What made me think I could succeed this time? Especially in a foreign country with cultural complications I still didn't fully understand. We had long, difficult conversations about it. She said she loved me, but also needed to think about her own future, that she couldn't wait forever for me to decide what I wanted. It was fair, but it added another layer of pressure to an already complex situation. Around this time, I started seriously researching what would happen if I needed to return to England. I'd lost touch with most people there. My ex-wife had remarried and moved to Scotland. My brother and I had repaired our relationship somewhat after the hospital incident, but we weren't close. I had no house, no job prospects at 55 years old, no real network to fall back on. Starting over in England would mean finding cheap accommodation, probably a room in a shared house, applying for whatever jobs would take someone my age with a decade-long gap in their resume. It would be humiliating and difficult and lonely in different ways than Thailand was lonely, but it would also be stable, predictable, with access to healthcare through the NHS, and a government that wouldn't kick me out. I kept these thoughts to myself mostly, but they haunted quiet moments. The pandemic hit in my 9th year and everything changed overnight. Pattaya shut down completely. The bars closed, tourists disappeared, and thousands of foreigners left Thailand in panic trying to get home before borders sealed. I stayed because I had nowhere else to go and because flights were expensive and chaotic. Haeom moved in fully during lockdown, since we couldn't see each other otherwise due to restrictions. We learned to live together in that small apartment, cooking every meal, finding ways to entertain ourselves without spending money or going anywhere. It was strangely peaceful despite the fear and uncertainty. We played cards, watched series online, talked about everything and nothing. The enforced slowness of lockdown life made me realize how much of my previous existence in Pattaya had been empty motion, killing time in bars and streets without real purpose. With everything stripped away, I was forced to confront whether I actually liked the life I'd built, or if I'd just been avoiding something deeper. Money became extremely tight during this period. My pension kept coming, but everything else was uncertain. I couldn't do much freelance work, because businesses everywhere were cutting costs. The savings I'd managed to rebuild were disappearing again to cover basic living expenses for 2 people. Aom had lost her job when the hotel chain shut down multiple properties. She was applying everywhere, but jobs were scarce and competition was intense. We talked about marriage more seriously then, because it would give her more security and options. I finally agreed not because of pressure, but because lockdown had shown me that she was the person I wanted beside me when things got hard. We had a small ceremony at the local district office with just 2 witnesses, no party or celebration, because gathering wasn't allowed. Her family understood and appreciated the symbolic sin sod I gave, 50,000 baht, which was modest but meaningful. We were legally married, and it felt right even though the circumstances were strange. When Pattaya eventually reopened, everything was different. So many bars had closed permanently, including the Silver Moon where I'd met Ploy. Walking Street was a ghost town compared to before. The expat population had thinned significantly, with many people having left and never returned. The ones who remained were shell-shocked and wary, unsure if tourism would ever recover to previous levels. But slowly life crept back toward normal. Arm found work again at a different hotel. I picked up more freelance projects. We moved to a slightly bigger apartment in the same area for 10,000 baht a month. It wasn't luxury, but it was ours, and we'd survived something together that had broken many other relationships. That counted for something. I'm 56 now as I'm telling you this story. I've been in Pattaya for nearly a decade, and I'm still here, but it looks nothing like what I imagined when I first arrived. I'm not living in paradise, sipping cocktails on beaches without a care. I'm living a fairly ordinary life in a foreign country, working online to supplement my pension, married to a Thai woman who is my partner, rather than a fantasy, volunteering a few times a week because it gives me purpose. I've made every financial mistake possible and somehow survived them. I've lost hundreds of thousands of baht to scams, bad relationships, poor planning, medical emergencies, and simple ignorance about how things actually work here. I've been lonely, depressed, desperate, and close to giving up more times than I can count. But I'm still standing, and that's more than many can say. The mistakes I made weren't unique to me. I see new expats arriving constantly and walking into the exact same traps. They're still in holiday mode, spending like money doesn't matter. They're still falling for the first woman who shows them attention. They're still drinking every day because bars are open and beer is cold, and what else is there to do? They're still trusting the wrong people, investing in bad businesses, ignoring health insurance and failing to plan for the future. They think they're different, that it won't happen to them, that they're smarter than the guys who came before. But Pattaya has patterns, and those patterns don't change regardless of who walks into them. The city takes what you give it and gives back very little beyond temporary pleasure and expensive lessons. If I could go back and talk to myself 9 years ago walking off that plane at Suvarnabhumi Airport, I'd say slow down. Observe before jumping in. Protect your money like your life depends on it, because it does. Don't trust easily. Don't chase fantasy. Build real connections with real people. Learn the language and culture properly. Have hobbies and purpose beyond consumption. Keep ties to your home country, even if you think you're done with it. Get health insurance immediately. Make a budget and stick to it. And remember that paradise is a marketing concept, not a sustainable lifestyle. I'd tell him that Thailand can be wonderful, but it's not going to fix whatever is broken inside you. That work has to come from within, regardless of where you're living. The expats who thrive long-term here are the ones who adapt rather than resist. They live within their means, build genuine relationships, contribute something to the community around them, and maintain perspective about what this place really is. They don't try to recreate their Western life with imported everything. They don't spend every night in bars numbing themselves. They don't chase youth or status or validation through money. They just exist here peacefully, appreciating the good parts while accepting the difficult parts as the price of the choice they made. I'm trying to be that kind of expat now, even though it took me years of painful lessons to get here. Some days are better than others. Some days I still wonder if staying was the right choice, or if I should admit defeat and go back to England while I still can. But then AM laughs at something silly, or a student at the language school tells me they passed an important exam, or I ride my motorbike along the coast at sunset and remember why I came here in the first place. Those moments don't erase the mistakes, but they make them feel worthwhile in a strange way. Living as an expat in Thailand, and especially in Pattaya, is not the fantasy that gets sold online. It's complicated, financially risky, emotionally challenging, and sometimes brutally lonely. But it's also my life now, and I've built something here that matters even if it's not impressive by conventional standards. I've learned more about myself in these 9 years than in all the decades before combined. I've faced consequences for every bad decision without anyone to bail me out or blame. I've learned that freedom and security are in tension, and choosing one often costs you the other. I've learned that happiness isn't about circumstances, but about finding meaning wherever you are with whatever you have. These are not the lessons I came to Thailand seeking, but they're the ones it insisted on teaching. So to anyone watching this and considering a similar move, I won't tell you not to do it. But I will tell you to be honest with yourself about why you're really going, what you're actually running from or toward, and whether you have the resources and resilience to handle it when paradise turns out to be just another place with different problems. Pattaya will take everything you're willing to give and more if you let it. The question is whether what you get in return is worth the cost. For me, the answer is complicated. Neither fully yes nor fully no, but somewhere in between where real life actually exists. So I'm still figuring it out one day at a time, and maybe that's all anyone can do wherever they end up calling home.